I'm here today with John Michael. John is a member of Grace Avenue United Methodist Church, has been for many years. He is one of our youth sponsors and counselors. And John is also the host of a very popular podcast called Sober Speak. John, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Billy. I sure appreciate it.
You bet. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Serenity Prayer. And John, I know the Serenity Prayer has been important in your life. Would you tell us a little bit about maybe the first time you really encountered the Serenity Prayer?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I grew up in a home that was not religious, spiritual, anything like that. My mom was kind of teetered between an atheist and agnostic. And so it's not like we had a lot of prayers hanging around our home. In fact, my wife now actually has the prayer on a wall in our home, and I get to see it on a consistent basis. But when I was growing up, I wasn't exposed to anything like that. And the first time that I was exposed to the Serenity Prayer, and I didn't know it was the Serenity Prayer, I actually got into recovery in my later 20s. And I remember going in there and hearing the prayer, and there were two prayers that were consistently used. One of them was the Serenity Prayer, and the other was the Lord's Prayer. Now, the Lord's Prayer was a little too long to memorize right off the bat. And, I had heard in some form or fashion the Lord's Prayer before, but I didn't know it by heart by any means. But that Serenity Prayer was something that I could hold on to, and that I was able to wrap my little pea spiritual brain around somehow, and I was able to use that. And so that was my first exposure to the Serenity Prayer. It was actually the first prayer, besides "Now I lay me down to sleep," that I actually knew by heart. So the Serenity Prayer means a lot to me.
Wow. So it was really a touchstone for you, and I think that's one of the things that is important as we think about how we cope with a lot of different situations in our lives today. We have these things spiritually that are touchstones. Say a little bit about why this is a touchstone for you.
Well, I guess there's a couple things. Number one, it kind of goes back to the beginning. And then there's also present day, right? And I use it, it's like a little Swiss Army knife for me. I'm able to have the Serenity Prayer in my pocket when I need it. It works in just about every situation. It's just kind of burned into my consciousness. Back in the beginning, I think what it did is it served as a touchstone to, I think at its base level, it taught me how to have a relationship with God, and it taught me how to have a relationship with you. And I didn't know how to do either of those things. I think today what it does is when I don't know if this ever happens to you, but I have a tendency to get wrapped around the axle about particular subjects. And whenever I get wrapped around the axle, it allows me to step back and to have a tool that I can use to come at it from whatever that subject is, whether it's a family issue, whether it's a health issue, whether it's a societal issue, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's political in nature. It allows me to be able to step back from that particular issue and look at it through a different lens. It helps me to process those particular situations in a different way, if you will.
Yeah, so I love that image of a Swiss Army knife, right? And a tool to be able to cope with a lot of different things in our life. So there's different aspects to the prayer. So let's start with the most basic one, serenity. What do you understand serenity to mean in your life?
Well, serenity is something, I guess it's like when you feel it, you just know it and you know that it's there. And I will say that before getting into recovery, I had no idea what serenity was. I lived a life of chaos, and I'm not going to go into all those details, but I didn't have much serenity in my life. And then as I started going through the recovery process and building a relationship with God, I had moments of kind of peace, if you will, to where all of a sudden there wasn't that churning going on inside me, and there wasn't that grand central station going on up in my head. I was able to just sit and be at peace, and I thought, this must be what serenity is. I didn't even know it existed. I remember there was a mother figure of mine. She just recently passed away. Her name was Mrs. Duncan. And she would say to me, I'd say to her, you know, I was feeling like at peace the other day. And I was like, I just can't believe. And then I said to her, I hope that maybe someday I can live that way on a consistent basis. And she says, well, you can, John. And it had never occurred to me that people could actually live that way, live comfortably within their own skin without wanting to get out and, you know, take industrial amounts of anything to solve their issues or go shopping or do whatever they needed to do. But I could just sit there and be in peace. And I will say that in the serenity prayer itself, it talks about God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things I can. I think it kind of works in the opposite way. In other words, if I can look at a situation, whatever it may be, and I can picture what and act upon what God would have me do in that particular situation and realize that I can't change it, I think that is when serenity enters the picture.
Right, right. Well, and it talks about in Philippians in the New Testament about how Christ offers us the peace that passes all understanding. And I think that to me is very much a part of this idea of serenity. Peace is not simply the absence of conflict. It's also that greater sense of wholeness, and serenity very much part of that.
In fact, in the end of the Serenity Prayer, the long version of the Serenity Prayer, it says that I may live reasonably happy.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that everything's going to be fantastic all the time, but I can have a reasonable comfortableness with my surroundings.
Sure. So part of the other part of this Swiss Army knife in the prayer is that it's not only serenity, but it's also courage. So say a word to us about what you think the role of courage is in the way in which we cope and how it relates to this prayer.
Well, there's a quote I've heard before. It says, men of faith have courage. And then you think, well, if they have faith, why in the world would they need courage? And I think that courage for me raises its head, and I need courage, and other people need courage in my estimation, because what happens is when I come into a relationship with God, all of a sudden I've been living this other way of life. And I know everything about how to live this way of life, and I know the policies and procedures in this particular way of life. And then I step into this other room, and I absolutely have it's scary. You can hear the promise, and you can hear people saying, we love this way of life. But until you actually go through it and experience it, until you work against your intuition and do things that you normally would not do, like turn to God. When I start going through that phase of my life, well, I need courage in order to get me through that uncomfortableness, if you will, because it's not always easy.
Right.
Faith is not easy, as you know.
Well, and some of the most courageous steps we ever take are those first tiny steps, maybe hardly even discernible to someone else, but to us, that small step of faith is so huge, and it takes an enormous amount of courage. Courage is not always something that's visible to the outside eye.
No. Yeah, it's not. And just those little things, like something will come up in my life, and I knew I handled it this way at one point, and then all of a sudden just to stop and to pray and to ask for direction and to do it possibly another way, possibly even to go out of my way to be of service or to be kind to somebody that I would not want to be kind to normally. It takes courage to do all those things. And even with maybe family members, you start setting up new boundaries in your life, and you start thinking of things in a different way and say, I'm not going to be treated that way anymore. I've been treated that way for a long time, and it's time to start doing things a different way. And you know you're going to upset the apple cart. Right. And it's not going to be easy. Right. And you're going to have people saying, what are you doing? We're used to this system. Why are you upsetting the apple cart?
Right. And that takes courage. So the third part then of that opening part of the serenity prayer is about wisdom, the wisdom to know the difference. So tell us a little bit about the wisdom to know the difference, because it seems to me that in some respects may be the toughest of all of this.
Yeah, I agree. So I think it kind of goes back a couple of steps. Number one, the wisdom is not going to come from inside myself, if you will. It's going to come from something outside of me. It's going to come from the Holy Spirit. It's going to come through God. It's going to come through my relationship with Jesus. And if I don't have that as my base, it's hard for me to even go into the serenity prayer with the rest of it. In other words, I see wisdom as, when you come to know God, well, first of all, you start learning real quickly, well, number one, I shouldn't steal anymore. Number one, I shouldn't be vandalizing neighborhoods anymore. Number one, I shouldn't be acting a fool out in clubs all night long, right? This is probably not what God wanted for me. So those are the easy things. But then you kind of come down to more complicated type of situations that have gray area. And I have known people that I go to, and sometimes I'll have 10 different people that I ask, and 10 different people that I trust and that I know have a spiritual walk. And they will come up to me and they'll have 10 different answers to that particular situation. And then you're back to the drawing board. It's about me and him. And to me, wisdom is taking some complicated sort of situation where relationships are involved and there's a lot of gray area, and being able to sift through it and maybe not coming up with the solution, but it's coming up with something to say, this is the next best step, and to follow that path. It's about me taking a situation, and as opposed to leaning back from it, maybe leaning into the issue and thinking, okay, what would God have me do here? And pushing through that, and not in like a bull in a china shop, in a subtle way of pushing through that situation and asking for his guidance. And then I have this kind of game that I play with myself. I don't know if it's a game. It's how I make major decisions in my life. And that is, I'll use the serenity prayer, and then I'll go inside and I think about, usually I have two different options. One is to go this way and one is to go that way. It's usually an A or a B type of thing. And I'm able to go inside and I think about which of those decisions gives me more peace and which of those decisions causes me unrest. And a lot of the times I'm going, I don't want this one to give me peace. This is not the easy way out. This is not safe. This is not the path that I was really thinking about consciously, but subconsciously, or with my God and how he guides me inside. That's what I think of as wisdom.
Right. So there's a lot of gray area in our lives all the time, but boy, there's a lot of gray area in our lives right now, especially with COVID and so much uncertainty about what is going to happen and things like that. So I wonder if you might kind of just talk about how the Serenity Prayer speaks to this moment in time where we are right now in the midst of COVID-19 and all of the uncertain things that are going on with us today.
I was driving down one of the side roads on the tollway with my daughter Kyla one day. And this was many years ago. She was very small. And I came up on a traffic, not a traffic, but a railroad, one of those things where the train was going by and it just stopped all the traffic and everyone was backed up. And as I pulled up on that, I kind of did a deep sigh. I wasn't real happy about being there. I didn't want to wait. I had an agenda that I needed to accomplish. And as I came to the stop, Kyla looked up at the train and she said, "Daddy, look at this. We get to watch the entire train go by." It's about adjusting my perspective and about thinking about what is God using me for in this time? How can I be an example of His work? How can I be an example of His grace in my life? And you know, you can turn on the news and you see those 2, 3, 4 boxes on the television, and you see people talking about a particular issue. Doesn't matter what side of the coin you're on, but they're squawking at each other. And I sometimes can get caught up in that, if you will. And what I've learned to do with the Serenity Prayer is to kind of back up from that and think about, you know, what are the chances that I am the only one, and that one person that I agree with in that box right there, what are the chances that we are the only 2 right people in the entire world? Probably pretty slim. And so I have to kind of back up from that and think about, okay, what does God want me to do in this situation, you know? And I know where He'll lead me in particular things, but just because I'm being led that way doesn't mean that other people have to be led that way. And that's okay. And when you talk about the pandemic, maybe it's a chance to kind of step back and develop my relationship with my family, and to see you know, how I can use the Serenity Prayer to help others in this world.
Right. We really are at a crossroads right now in terms of the way we are living. And, you know, I think that's so powerful to think about the fact that the train's going by right now. We can't change that. But in that moment, we can change our perspective. We need to have the courage to change our perspective about how we think about that, and maybe even through the eyes of a child, as you talked about that. And then just knowing that God will offer wisdom if we're willing to lean into it, like you talked about. And I think leaning into that is such a beautiful message as well.
Even coming over here today, you know, I mean, you think about, you want to look good, you know, you want to say the things that are going to matter to people. You know, it's a little scary speaking with you, the lead pastor of our church, you know, and but ultimately you just have to kind of give it over to Him and trust that what needs to come out will come out. And I'm not going to change the world with this little talk, right? But hopefully it will be something that can help somebody somewhere along the line.
Well, John, you make such a difference in so many people's lives, in your family's life, in the life of our church, in the life of the teenagers in our church, the life of people in our community. And we are so grateful to you and just blessed to have had time to talk a little bit about this today. Thanks for your perspective.
Thank you for having me, Billy. I appreciate it.